talking about an unsolved murder case, and it is the murder of Jonbenet Ramsey. So Jonbenet was 6 years old when she was murdered. She was found on the 26th of December 1996 in her basement of her home in Boulder, Colorado. So Jonbenet had a really wealthy background. Her father was a very wealthy businessman and her mother was a socialite with a beauty queen background. She had literally everything that a girl of 6 years old could ever have wanted or needed. She had an amazing life. Her parents absolutely worshipped her. So Jonbenet was actually a beauty queen herself, and by the time of her murder she had obtained 5 pageantry titles, which is that's something special for the age of 6. She was well known for her dazzling smile and her bright blonde hair, and it wasn't the case that her mother was overbearing or had forced her down this route in life. She absolutely loved the limelight and dressing up, so it wasn't like there was anything weird going on why her mother was forcing her to live the same sort of life that she herself had lived. So what did actually happen on the 26th of December 1996? So the morning of the 26th, Patricia, who is otherwise known as Patsy and is actually Jonbenet's mother, she found a ransom note and proceeded to call the police. Whoever left the note was requesting $118,000 in exchange for Jonbenet's safe return, for her to return unharmed. And in this ransom note there was details of what would happen to Jonbenet if Patsy and John Ramsey, her father, didn't pay this ransom. However, that afternoon, Jonbenet's body was actually found in the basement of their family home. She had had a fracture to her head, and this was thought to have been a baseball bat or a torch, I believe. And the cause of death was actually asphyxia. I believe that's how you pronounce it, which was caused by strangulation. And she had actually been strangled with something made from her mother's paintbrushes. So the way she was found, her death was treated as a homicide. It also seemed that she had been sexually assaulted. However, for some reason, the district attorney very quickly dropped this point, that this was caused by a bicycle incident or using a bicycle or something unusual like that, and it wasn't really touched on until there was a false confession. And that at that point I don't think there actually had really been any finger pointing towards any sort of sexual assault, and the finger pointing kind of went straight towards her family. So in terms of the investigation, the crime scene was barely treated like one. After she was found, people were traipsing in and out of the house, and so all evidence was thereby contaminated. Also, the way that the police initially dealt with the crime was extremely poor. Anything that could have been found, any evidence or false alibis or things like that could have been found in these early stages, gone, just because they didn't deal with it the way they really should have. And actually many police departments now around that sort of area, when they focus on how to deal with the crime, they look at this case as what not to do. What the police of Boulder, Colorado did is frowned upon, and it wasn't the best response. John Ramsey actually carried his daughter from the basement up into the house, and thereby contaminating or weakening any evidence or any sort of DNA that could have been found on her. Also, one important thing is, so when I was watching documentaries, people were suggesting that maybe the family had all come together with a story of whereby they were protecting one member of the family, because obviously a lot of finger pointing went initially to the 3 people in the house: the mother, the father, and the brother, who was 9 years old at the time. So what I find of interest and quite annoying is the fact that the police didn't initially interview the family members separately. By the time that they actually were interviewed separately, the 3 could have come together with some sort of story. So if someone did do it, even if it was an accident, there is no way to catch anyone out or find a false alibi or anything like that. Which really, really frustrates me. Nevertheless, there were some differences in each of their stories or alibis or whatever you call it. There were some differences, and so obviously finger pointing went straight towards them. If they can't actually agree on what even happened that night or that morning, then something a little bit odd's going down. Also, you have to be aware of the fact that the duct tape that was used on Jonbenet was found to have fibres on it, and these fibres matched the ones found on Patsy's clothing. Then in July 2008, this new touch DNA technology came out, which I personally don't know much about. You can research that if you want to. But that came out in 2008, and basically it kind of just showed that the Ramsey family had nothing to do with their daughter's death. Since then, in 2016, it was actually shown that there was a mixture of DNA found on Jonbenet, and so further tests have to take place. So maybe the blame will start to come back. So earlier we touched on a false confession, and this was done by John Mark Carr. So that's 3 separate words. He confessed to killing Jonbenet. He had a story all made up, and he was sort of arrested in Thailand, which is where he was when he admitted to murdering her. So John Carr was actually quite a strange guy. He was a sort of known paedophile and had some sort of weird interest in children. He felt like he was in love with children in not a oh she's really cute kind of way. I believe he actually went on to marry a 13-year-old. I heard on the documentary. I'm not sure whether that's true or not, but apparently it was legal, and apparently he actually went on to do that. But it turns out he didn't murder her because the DNA did not match John Carr's DNA. You're probably sat there wondering why would a man who's chilling in Thailand admit to murdering a 6-year-old girl? I don't know. And to make this even weirder, he was actually a former teacher. The case to this day remains unsolved. It's still open, and they are still investigating and trying to find out exactly what happened to Jonbenet Ramsey. So let's just talk about some theories about her death. So the most prominent theory that I can find, and I'm not sure it's one that I agree with, but that is that her mother had something to do with her death, or did in fact herself murder Jonbenet. And one of the reasons people believe that Patsy actually had something to do with the murder was due to this ransom note that she found. So this ransom note was actually 2.5 to 3 pages long, which is a little bit unusual for a ransom note, because a ransom note is normally done very hurriedly and in such a panic. Someone's just kidnapped someone and they're thinking, okay, let's just write how much we want, let's get this away to the family, and we'll, that's what they do. So a ransom note is not something that people sit down and have an hour and a nice cup of tea, planning out, detailing, explaining every last bit of it. That was weird. So finding a ransom note that was this detailed was probably the first sort of factor contributing to why Patsy had a lot of blame directed at her surrounding the death. So to make this even weirder, the paper and the pen used for this ransom note actually belonged to the Ramseys and was in their house at the time it was written. So whoever murdered this girl had a lot of time on their hands. They clearly murdered her or wrote the note first, one of the two, but either way, they both happened in the house. So they obviously were in the house for a long period of time to write this note, handwrite this note, so it wasn't done like prior to the murder, to write this note and to murder this child. It seems so likely that one of the 3 family members in the house at the time did this, because otherwise you probably would notice that there was some random stranger walking around in your house for that period of time, either at night time or in the middle of the night or early hours of the morning. That's a bit weird. So another thing that is quite interesting about this ransom note is actually the amount of money requested. So they requested $118,000. And I get it's a lot of money, and ransom notes generally do request high amounts of money from wealthy people, people that they know could actually get their hands on the money. But $118,000, like, that's awfully specific. Like, don't you think you would round up to 150 or round down to 100? Why would someone want exactly $118,000? Just to make it even weirder, the documentary, which I will, like, at a later point in this video tell you exactly what this documentary was and where you can find it. In the documentary, it actually said that this amount of money was the exact amount of Jonbenet Ramsey, so the father, his Christmas bonus, like the exact amount of money as his Christmas bonus. Whether that like was written by the mother and because that number was just stuck in her head, or whether someone knew how much she was getting for a Christmas bonus and thought, well, that's extra money that he doesn't normally have and need, maybe we can get that, I don't know, but it just seemed awfully specific for like a quick like kidnap and ransom note. Just seemed too bizarre. So you're probably thinking, why didn't they get some handwriting experts involved? And they actually did, and they basically said that this was more than likely, like almost certainly, written by Patsy. But that doesn't necessarily mean that because she wrote the note that she murdered her daughter. She could have been covering up, or I don't know. But it doesn't necessarily tie her in with murdering somebody, it just says she wrote the note. So you're probably wondering about her father and her brother. So I'll first talk about her father because this is like very, very simple. No one ever really thought he had like involvement, like just him, like just he murdered her, like it was all his fault. People pointed like fingers thinking he might have known something, he might have been like covering up for his wife or his son, but nobody actually thought he like had any real involvement in murdering his daughter. And this is kind of, people actually believe this because in interviews and talks and things like that, following his daughter's death, he and his wife Patsy don't seem so close. They don't have any sort of, they don't really look at each other or like go, oh, there, like I hope you're alright, or he doesn't have his arm around his wife when talking about such a devastating topic as the death of their daughter, which you would probably imagine there'd be some comforting, some hugging, something like that, but there isn't. So whether he knew she's done something wrong, but he's backing her up, like covering for her, but he obviously would still like be pretty mad because she's murdered his daughter. I don't know, but they definitely don't seem to be getting along, and it seems quite hostile between the pair. So in terms of her brother Burke was 9 years old, so he was still very, very young and probably had no idea really what was going on. Obviously he understands murder, but like behind the scenes and like having the intent to kill, I don't believe a 9-year-old would have those like sort of emotions or thoughts, but it's not completely uncommon or unheard of. So basically 2 months prior to his sister's death, he did actually hit her with a sports bat. It's believed to have been a baseball bat or a golf club. He did actually hit her with one of those. Small little fight or argument with a sibling. I mean, me personally, I have had a few arguments with my siblings when I was little, so that was kind of like overlooked and people thought, no, like that's not linked. People believe that a 9-year-old couldn't do as much damage as was done to her head to have fractured it like that. But then, interestingly, in the documentary, they actually get these 9-10-year-olds to hit a big watermelon with a torch, which is what was thought to have fractured her skull, as hard as they can. And interestingly, they did do a lot of damage. So, yeah, I'm not sure how much of that I believe. I don't think a 9-year-old would intentionally kill, but I feel like they could physically kill. So maybe Burke did get super angry at his sister, like even angrier than he had been 2 months ago, and hit her quite hard in that like sort of rage and accidentally murdered her, and so the parents decided to cover it up. That is possible. Do I think it's true? I'm not sure, but personally, I have no idea when it comes to this case. I can't even like hazard a guess or like choose which theory so far I believe to be like most likely. It is so difficult, but I do believe it happened within the family. Also, just to add, the knots that were in the object that strangled and killed Jonbenet were extremely complex. Like, you would need some level of skill or like history in like, I don't know, scouts or something to know how to tie these particular knots. So 9-year-old being able to do that, don't really think so. The theories for this murder have absolutely ran wild. In the years since it happened, they have even gone as far to say that their next door neighbour, Bill McReynolds, who was known as like the sort of town's Santa, he dressed up as Santa because obviously you were aware it was just Christmas time when she was murdered. They even went as far to say that he murdered her. And so the theories to this particular case are extensive. I don't want to make this video super long going into depth with every single theory out there because there are hundreds. So if you do want to learn a little bit more about this case or look into some other theories that go into more detail, there is a really interesting documentary on Netflix. It's a Netflix's own documentary, and it is ridiculously interesting. The way that they perform this documentary and put it out there is just, it's so real. It's so like, it's basically, I'll give you a little bit of a background. It's basically they have like castings. It's called Casting Jonbenet Ramsey, and the way that they do it is they have like these casting auditions for the different individual characters. So they have like, I don't know how many, but 10 Patsies, 10 Johns, you know, like, and they all each perform different parts of the murder, or leading up to the murder, or following from the murder, and they all have their own opinions and talk about like the interesting facts and the theories and the things that they think that's a little bit unusual. And the way that they do it is so engaging. You have that same sort of interest in true crime, and you don't just want to know the basic facts, you really want to know and try and think about and figure out what happened. Then I would strongly recommend that you watch that. If you enjoyed the content in this video, please give me a big thumbs up so I know to continue filming this sort of thing, and comment, give me some suggestions to other murders, missing people, anything like that, and then subscribe so you don't miss out any future content. Thank you guys so much for watching.